ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, cuts to our culture. To save money, the government is slashing jobs at the heart of our national identity, the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. But is it financial prudence or cultural vandalism?
Historians are really alarmed at these developments that there have been and at the downgrading and the demuscling of history in the ministry and at the government level. And they're saying it's misguided, that this ministry becoming a policy shop is the wrong way to go, and that's going to be like vandalism to our historical knowledge and our understanding.
That's reporter Phil Pennington, who is covering the story for RNZ. He'll chat about what prompted the cuts, who and what are affected, and the fallout. And retired chief historian Jock Phillips joins us later in the podcast to talk about what could happen to our vital history websites.
Oh, I think it's very, very sad. I mean, there's been a long tradition, which is a very proud tradition of historians serving the people of New Zealand. And the websites particularly that they're producing are major contributions to enriching the knowledge of New Zealanders and people outside New Zealand about this country and its history and its culture. And it's a tragedy if that's allowed to fossilise and eventually, as it will do, disappear.
But first, the changes. It was confirmed last week that the Ministry for Culture and Heritage will cut 26 jobs, including those of 4 senior historians. Popular history websites, including Te Ara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand, have had a partial reprieve, but there are still serious fears they will eventually wither and die. It's all to save money after the ministry's funding was reduced in Budget 2025. This week, 7 history and heritage organisations put out a joint statement on the restructure decision, deeply concerned that resources could one day be transferred to for-profit organisations and, quote,
New Zealand's historical record is not a commodity to be monetised. These platforms must remain free and publicly accessible as they have been for decades. Any privatisation could lead to paywalls, reduced accessibility, and the commercialisation of our collective memory. And these cuts will damage New Zealand's international reputation in the historical and cultural heritage sectors.
Here's Phil's take.
If you're an historian or anyone who cares about history, the alarm bells have been ringing, and this has reached a much louder point after last week's decision to cut quite a few historians and to reduce the support for the websites and that public-facing role by quite a lot. So I think if you asked historians, they'd tell you it's been a rough several years for them and for New Zealand's sort of history resources, and this is that bad icing on that cake.
So do you think, is it sort of a quiet restructure or a full-blown crisis? How would you rate this?
Right. So it's in line with the other restructurings. The Ministry of Culture and Heritage lost in 2025 budget $8 million over 4 years. By their own calculations, we got a decision document on this leaked to us last week, and in that their secretary says we're going to have to save $3 million this year, so even more than the $2 million they might have been expecting. So you're going to have to cut back a small ministry of 150 or so people with that important historical task. And the wider context too, like I said, historians would be saying this has been a rough few years. This follows problems and cutbacks at the National Library and at Archives New Zealand as well. They went through this process of proposing cuts, making their cuts. That was back in March. They came up with their decision on their cuts. Similar thing, losing about 30 roles. At the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, they're losing about 26 roles, going from about 150 to 125. It's the nature of those roles that has caused alarm in the community of historians and archivists and record keepers who say, if you don't know yourself, you don't know your history, you don't know who you are. That's the frame they're putting around it. They're saying this is really a bit of a crisis. I mean, a letter they sent asking for the government to reverse the cuts at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, they said the changes threaten to dismantle decades of world-class historical scholarship, shutter vital resources for history research, and harm public education. So, they weren't pulling any punches with that.
Well, that was my next question too. I mean, how are staff reacting? And I was thinking anger, fear or resignation. I'm feeling like it's more anger here.
Yeah, there's some anger. I mean, as you'd expect, some people have taken voluntary. There's half a dozen voluntary redundancy there. The focus at the Culture and Heritage has been on how many historians we're going to go. It's a little hard with all the figures, but it looks as though they originally said that they would cut 5 of their 8 senior historians, and then after the proposal, then they got feedback. The Secretary Laulu Leoanai, he said, well, I've reconsidered that a little bit, and we're going to keep one of those. So it's like cut 4, keep 4. There are another 2 senior historians that are staying on till December. And this gives you an inkling of what's alarming people is that they're keeping them on because they're the ones who interact with the schools a lot with the histories curriculum, right? And you remember that back in 2023, we had the signal that at the start of bringing in a New Zealand histories curriculum, an overhaul there with a real focus on Māori history and Te Tiriti.
History was made at Parliament today when the Prime Minister announced that New Zealand history would be made a compulsory subject in all primary and secondary schools. It left iwi leaders who thought they were there solely to unveil a New Zealand Wars plaque completely overwhelmed.
Those 2 historians at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, they front that work for the ministry. You could say they front that work for the government with the Ministry of Education. They will stay till December, but then they're gone. And the Ministry of Culture and Heritage says they're staying till December to fulfil its obligations to the schools. So it recognises it has some obligations, but they're very much time-locked.
Yeah, what happens after that?
Well, the Culture and Heritage says this is the Ministry of Education's ballgame, essentially.
There has been talk, Phil, and I don't know whether this is a fair question or not, but that the government is going after the so-called woke or bloated public sector. Is that true or fair, do you think?
I don't do comment or opinion. What would be my gauge? I mean, if you listen, depends who you listen to. So if you listen to Winston Peters, then clearly the woke, what he would consider anything woke within government is not just fair game, but needs to be put down. But then there's, a wide range of people across this area. And, Paul Goldsmith, the minister in this area, he has not made any of those sorts of comments. And he would defend what they're doing. And if you look at Budget 2025, there is actually more money in Budget 2025, about 40 million more, about 170 million for keeping the public informed and building the knowledge base around history and culture. But, and I'm asking the Internal Affairs to confirm this, it appears that most of that extra money is to do with this move into this big new archives building in Wellington, as opposed to, well, clearly it's not about employing any extra staff. They're cutting staff, they're cutting historians. And the worry actually at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, so you have this irony there, they're spending a lot of money leasing this big new building, gold-plated building in Wellington for archives to hold all these records. Across town at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, though, they're cutting historians and they're actually reducing public access to their websites. I think that's undeniable. The Secretary has said, OK, I'm going to try to maintain those websites like the Te Ara Encyclopedia website, and he's not going to go as far in cutting those as the proposal was to cut, but they are going to be threadbare. And people I've talked to in that ministry, they think that this is, a soft end for those things. It's going to take more time for it to go off the ministry books, but it's not going to support those websites. The big thing really here is that they are reducing their public engagement at the ministry and they're becoming more of a policy shop. And the boss has said, we have to do that. We don't have enough money to have any other choice. We have to stick to the knitting of what is mandated for us to do in legislation, etc. And they're basically saying this other stuff, which is like the interactions with the schools, the interactions through the website with the public, that's like a nice to have. It's not a must have anymore.
What about, Phil, historical associations? Any word from them? What are they saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, they put out that letter back in June saying, please don't do this to the government. They said that this is going to be really catastrophic, is actually the way they said, to the ability of New Zealanders to preserve, discover and share their stories. They're saying that across a wide range of stories, whether you're talking about rural New Zealand, Māori New Zealand, Pacifica, all of that. They're saying that this is like catastrophic, particularly in schools, they said. And they said, reducing the ministry to a policy shop is just totally misguided. They say this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what it's there for. They say the ministry is the ones that have the skills and the resources to actually do the engagement, and that's what they should be doing. I talked to Peter Miller just before I came on air. Now, he's a former regional archivist in Dunedin, former president of Archives Records Association, and he's just saying it seems to him and many of those people that he talks to in his community that the government here is not interested in culture. He does say they were let down by the previous government, but he's saying about this government, he says there's an overall downgrade in how culture and heritage and history are regarded here. And you can see that, he says, over not just what's happening at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage with historians, but what happened with New Zealand Archives before that and what happened at the National Library as well.
The restructure news isn't welcomed by Jock Phillips, who was the chief historian at Internal Affairs and then general editor of Te Ara, our official encyclopedia. He told our producer Gwen McClure that the website work of the Ministry of Culture and Heritage in particular is crucial, both nationally and internationally.
There are probably two major websites. The first is Te Ara, which is a general encyclopedia of New Zealand, aiming to provide both people within New Zealand and people outside New Zealand with a user-friendly, clear, interesting, accurate guide to New Zealand in all its aspects, beautifully illustrated with moving footage and so forth, designed to be both attractive and absolutely accurate. And that Te Ara website also includes the former published Dictionary of New Zealand Biography, which is a comprehensive and absolutely accurate listings of over 3,000 biographies of significant and representative New Zealanders. And that's a great taonga in and of itself. And the second big website is the New Zealand History website, which is a comprehensive set of entries about New Zealand's past. It's aimed both for people who are interested in New Zealand history, but particularly at the community in schools and universities, and again presents New Zealand history in a clear and accurate way with plenty of interactive resources, images, and so forth. And those two websites make a major contribution to New Zealand's understanding of itself and the world's understanding of New Zealand. And you only need to look at the user figures. I mean, Te Ara gets over 4 million separate users each year, a total of 13 million page views, which is a huge number and far more than, for example, the Te Papa website gets. New Zealand History gets over 3 million users each year, and the total number of page views on those two sites is about 20 million, which is an incredible amount of use and an awful lot of people enriched by that knowledge.
Who are those people, do you think?
Well, you can see about 70% of them are from within New Zealand, but one shouldn't forget the importance of the 30% outside New Zealand who relish Te Ara. When I go overseas, people are amazed at the quality of it. There's no equivalent anywhere else in any other country. And within New Zealand, you can see who is using it by who's referred to it. A lot of people come through Google, obviously. A lot of people come from Wikipedia and Facebook, but a lot come from universities and schools. So its essential use is by, students and school pupils. And a lot of links come in through the media, through Stuff, through Radio New Zealand. The media use it as a reliable and accurate resource, which they call upon all the time. So not to have it kept up, will be a terrible tragedy.
So is the risk here with these cuts that those two websites will be not maintained, or that they will completely go offline, or that it will just be the same number of staff?
What they says is that they'll sort of go into cold storage. And what that means is that eventually they will wither and die, because a website that's not kept up is eventually a website that does die. I mean, for several reasons. One is that as people do more and more research, there's new knowledge about the past and about the society, And you've got to keep up with those new findings in order to retain credibility. Secondly, there are new events. Suddenly a COVID epidemic springs up. You can't have a general history of New Zealand or an encyclopedia of New Zealand without covering significant events like that, which people want to explore. There'll be a new earthquake, and you've got to keep up with that. You'll have new governments come in. You've got to keep up with that. So there's always new events. And thirdly, there's new technology. I mean, a website that isn't kept up withers and dies because the technology moves on. And you find that the films that are on the site no longer play. The sound clips no longer play. A website that isn't alive is a website that dies, withers and dies.
If they do wither and die, is this knowledge stored elsewhere? Is it replicated anywhere else?
No, I mean, a few bits of Te Aro we published as books, but it's a tiny part of the whole website. The Dictionary of New Zealand Biography was published as books, but they're very expensive. They're not something that most people have on their bookshelves. And yet, through the website, those accurate, interesting biographies of significant New Zealanders are available at your fingertips, at the press of a button. And it's terrible to see that fade. And it's something I like. The Dictionary of New Zealand Biography, you've got to keep up with that because important New Zealanders keep dying. And, you need to make sure that those lives are remembered and recorded accurately.
You're a historian, so obviously you're going to think history is important, but can you explain to me why? Why is it about more than just getting an interesting fact? How does it shape what we do now? What's the loss to the country if we get rid of it?
Well, I don't believe that you can understand a country unless you understand the culture and the history, the way it evolved. You understand a place by knowing how it got there and became as it was. You can't really, interpret New Zealand society or even the landscape without understanding the historical forces that have shaped it. And it's always said that if you forget history, then you imperil the way decisions are made in the future.
While retired now, he still uses the websites often, and he keeps in touch with current staff who he says are devastated by the decision to restructure.
I mean, they passionately believe in the importance of what they're doing. They know they get continual feedback about the value of what they're doing, and they're mystified that a society should turn its back on these taonga. We continue to have our museums open, our art galleries open, we have plays, we have films. People realise that you can't cut those things in a time of economic, downturn. In some ways you need them more because they help to find ways out and important guides to the future.
And another potential loss won't, be music to Kiwi ears.
These bells are really, really special. They are in memory of soldiers who were lost in the First World War. And every time the carillon is played, it is a call to remembrance.
Phil, what about carillon? What are the changes here?
Well, the carillon is the set of bells in Pukeahu War Memorial next to the old museum in Wellington. It's got its own park. It's where they used to play those bells at the Anzac Parade, right? And Pukeahu is still the centre of the Anzac government parade, but they've not been able to play those bells except for about once in the last 12 years because they've had this very badly managed seismic upgrading of the tower. It's 50 metres tall. It's got 75 tonnes of bells in it, and they mismanaged it so badly that they thought they had strengthened it a few years ago. They went back and had a look and they realised that, we haven't actually done the right things because they hadn't diagnosed the problem. Anyway, that's the carillon. So it's like the only one of its kind. And as far as I know, there is only one person who can play that. He's from America. He's called the carillonist. And the proposal was to cut that job. As I understand it, that job is going. But when I asked the ministry, who's going to play the bells now? And they said, we'll do that. We'll bring in a contractor. But, that raises the question of how many contractors who play the carillon are there? And, if you go through the digital equivalent of the Yellow Pages, you don't find any. So we're asking, we've got an OIN on the carillon, what's going on? What have they told the carillonist? What has he told them about their plan to do this under contract? Will those bells be heard again, of course, is the big question. If not, that would be really quite what would you call that, Amanda? If you don't hear those bells at an Anzac parade again, what would that mean?
That's the end of a very important and beautiful era, I think. That's part of our history.
It would be quite an extraordinary thing, wouldn't it? That under these sort of quite meagre savings of a few million here, a few million there, and after spending multi-millions of dollars to strengthen that tower, they actually took all the bells out, right? 75 tonnes of bells, so that because they realised that the frame they were in was corroded, right? You can imagine those falling on your head. And then they replaced the frame. They actually did it on the cheap. I found out from
this is sounding like a debacle.
Yeah. They put the bells back in, and now we've got this new... and they're now finishing off the strengthening, which has been going on since 2012. But who's going to come along and play it? We don't know.
While he doesn't have an answer for that just yet, he does know the financial savings.
Well, it's $8 million over the 4 years. We don't know, of course, what's going to happen in budget 2026. There could be more cuts ordered up, or that they have to institute to conform to the government's will, and Nicola Willis is what she wants, because, of course, next year's election year. So if there's a thrust with this government on the economy and, it's cost of living, this sort of thing, this thing we've been talking about, what is a nice to have and what is a must have, if you compare that to hospitals and schools, a bit ironic we're talking history in schools, but it starts to look more like a nice to have. So it's more likely to suffer more cuts, I think you can say, next year than some of these other things like hospitals.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Phil Pennington and Jock Phillips. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and Alexia Russell and engineered by Jeremy Veal. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.